This is Space Nuts, where we talk about astronomy and space science every week. And thanks for joining us once again. Coming up, we've got plenty to talk about, as well as a special guest interviewer who we'll tell you more about shortly on this edition of Space Nuts. But we'll also be looking at the planet Neptune because they've made a very interesting discovery. Its temperature has dramatically changed in certain parts of the planet. And it's an unusual planet we don't get to talk about much. So we'll focus on that. We'll be hearing from Serb in Italy, who wants to know if he will ever see the results of a mission to another star in his lifetime. I'm just doing the maths, Serb. Could be a problem. And Sandy from Melbourne wants to talk about the recent interstellar meteor and whether or not we can go and pick up bits of it. That's all coming up on this edition of Space Nuts.
15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 10, 9, ignition sequence start.
Space Nuts.
5, 4, 3, 2.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Space Nuts.
Astronauts report it feels good.
So good of you to join us as we begin our trek to episode 400, which could take a little while, a couple of years maybe. Just bear with us. It'll happen, we hope. Andrew Dunkley here, of course, and joining me as always is the good professor himself, astronomer at large, Fred Watson. Hello, Fred.
Hello, Andrew. How are you doing today?
I am, well, I wish I could say I'm fine, but my son has been in touch to say he's got COVID.
Right.
After spending the weekend here.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So well, I'll just be keeping an eye on myself once again. Another bullet that I'm hopefully dodging. But other than that, yeah, had a great Easter with the family, and we sort of partied on until 7 p.m. It was big.
It's my kind of party these days.
Yes, indeed. Yes. Now, Fred, you've brought along a special guest. Would you like to do a formal introduction, please?
I think he came along of his own volition, but we certainly invited him. And ladies and gentlemen, in our widespread audience, I'd like to introduce Mr. David Astle, who is the presenter of ABC Evenings in Melbourne and has had a long and distinguished career in the Australian Broadcasting Commission. Over to you, David. How are you doing?
Very well, thanks, Fred. G'day, Anthony. Andrew, sorry. That's a great start.
Okay. No, it's all right because I got called David for a long time and people still do it. So that's okay. You can call me anything you like. I'll
well, Andrew is an anagram of wander, and my mind obviously wandered there in the last minute. I'm going to ask you this because I've got some questions I'd like to ask both of you. Having heard the show over the years, and congratulations entering the 4th century. That's very exciting. But with a film critic and a film lover, they will be hypnotized by the living screen when the film is being projected onto that screen. And the same applies to the night sky. That's when the action happens. So my question, I'll start with you, Fred, is does the day sky hold any fascination for you?
Fantastic question, David. And the answer is yes, on many different levels. The only difference between the day sky and the night sky is that the sun lights up the atmosphere during the day and renders it brighter than the celestial objects that are revealed when the sun dips below the horizon and the sky goes dark. So that everything's still there. And there are some objects that you can, under certain circumstances, see in a daytime sky. The most notable is the planet Venus at certain times in its celestial dance around the sun. There are times which we call Venus' greatest brilliance. That's the technical name of it. And at that time, Venus is brighter than the daytime sky. So you can actually see it with the unaided eye. I find it harder to find these days than I used to, but with a pair of binoculars, I can usually see it. Although there's always a warning against, with binoculars or telescopes during the day, never point them at the sun, because when you look through them, you will blind yourself. The other thing, though, about the daytime sky is that, of course, what's in the atmosphere is the weather. And we astronomers tend also to be kind of amateur meteorologists, weather watchers, because you're interested to know what the sky is going to do during the night. If you have weather anything like the weather we've had in Sydney for the last 2 months, you just give up hope altogether. But there are certain times of the day as well when the light itself changes. I remember having grown up in the Northern Hemisphere, in the UK, where the sun is never overhead. Here in our latitudes, it's almost overhead in midsummer, and that puts a completely different complexion on the landscape. It's a really lovely thing that always gives me a bit of a lift. But the other thing is when you get twilight phenomena, when the sun is going down, all kinds of things happen to the sky. This thing called the belt of Venus rises, which is the edge of the Earth's shadow cast on the atmosphere. You sometimes get these crepuscular rays, which are shafts of light that are shining through the sky. So in some ways, the daytime sky is as exciting as the nighttime sky. And one final caveat, I bet you wish you hadn't asked me this, David. One final thing, of course, for radio astronomers, the daytime sky is exactly the same as the nighttime sky, because they observe all 24 hours at a time. They not at a time necessarily, but they can observe throughout 24 hours because the sky is not bright in the radio spectrum. All right, I'll shut up now.
Andrew, would you care to answer that question? Because I have another one that I've tailored particularly for you. But how about you in the day sky? Do you look up with a little bit more intrigue and erudition, having rubbed shoulders with Fred for so long?
He certainly inspired me, and he does sort of make me think more about what's going on out there. And I do tend to look during the day as well as the night. And sometimes I get lucky. I got a wonderful daytime photo of the moon not so long ago. And so you've got this bright white, highly detailed cratered thing that floats around our planet on a vivid blue background. So I was very proud of that. But I think one of the quirkier that's happened because Fred and I were talking is I was whinging about the pollen the spring before last, and it prompted him to talk about these phenomena called pollen coronas, where the sunlight is broken up by the pollen in the air and creates these beautiful, colourful halos, which you can't see with the naked eye because of the brightness of the sun. But if you are at the right time of day with the right amount of pollen in the air, you could point a camera at it and take a photo and get a pollen corona photo. And I accepted the challenge, and I actually managed it that very afternoon after we recorded Space Nuts. Got this beautiful image of all these different colours, in a circle around the halo of the sun. And I never knew there was such a thing until he mentioned it, and I had a photo of it that afternoon. So yeah, I find it very intriguing. You just never know what's up there.
All right, for you, Andrew, I know that Fred has the distinction of an asteroid named after him, 5691, which I think that might be Cottesloe Beach. I'm not sure exactly where that postcode leads you. But for you, Andrew, if you had your wish, a realistic wish, what would you hope that would be named after you up there in the galaxies?
Oh my gosh. Oh gosh. You know what? The crater that Alan Shepard hit the golf ball in on the moon. Name that one after me.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great one.
I think there must be a golf club nebula somewhere that you could have. The five irons don't float, don't you? Float,
yeah,
right.
They don't. Yeah, he's been reading my books.
Yeah.
I'll turn this back to you, Fred. The one we just saw recently here in Australia, a Broken Hill amateur astronomer called Trevor Barry, who was awarded the very distinguished Berenice and Arthur Page Medal for amateur astronomy, along with another organisation. What struck me, because I had the pleasure of interviewing Trevor on air earlier this week.
Great.
And the way that not only was he so exuberant, but he was talking about how his calculations on Saturn's atmosphere have added intelligence to the NASA and Cassini databases. And what hit me almost for the first time was that space is really a wonderful playground for mathematicians. I know, as a person of words, I am struck with awe by the majesty of the spheres, and I can write my poems and try and describe it, in lyrical language. But the reason I'm not as deeply embedded in the glory of space, I do believe, could well to do with my mathematics runs short of the genius of someone like Trevor Barry, and obviously someone like you, Fred. Do you think that it is more seductive to someone of a mathematical bent?
What a great question, David. And I'm glad you painted a little picture of yourself in there as well, because we're remiss in not having asked you to tell us about, what you've been up to and what excites you. We might do that in a minute or two. But that's a really perceptive remark, that maybe if you have a mathematical mind, you tend to lean towards the idea of a universe out there that you can think of in 3 dimensions. That's the critical thing, because of course the night sky is a 2-dimensional tapestry, which took ancient people a long time to figure out what was going on. Whereas when you're studying the universe, whether you're an amateur astronomer or a professional or just an interested bystander, you do need to be able to visualize things in 3 dimensions, and maybe that demands a bit of mathematical prowess. There is another connection here, and that's that musicians apparently are similarly endowed with mathematical abilities. The two often go together, and certainly I know many of astronomers who are quite proficient musicians. I'm not including myself in that, but I have worked with one of Australia's greatest living composers who was here a couple of nights ago. I wrote the libretto for his 4th symphony, which was a choral work, which actually won an APRA award, believe it or not.
Wow.
How does an astronomer win
Cox, of course.
Sorry, say again.
Brian Cox, of course.
And there's Brian, that's right. Yeah, musical background. Yeah, it's absolutely right. And just finally, I'm really glad you mentioned Trevor. I know Trevor Barry well. I've been an admirer of his work since I first met him in 2000. And yes, exactly what you say. He has his amateur astronomy has dovetailed perfectly, particularly in the days when the Cassini mission was in full flight, and they needed the planet to be monitored because the Cassini telescopes couldn't point to everything at once. And there was Trevor in Broken Hill sending them, the news on the latest storms on Saturn, all the rest of it. A very well-deserved winner of the Berenice.
Remarkable man, and his own, DIY observatory. What a remarkable
and so humble as well. A former miner. A fabulous story. Yeah, it's a great story.
I guess for you, Andrew, did you have a mathematical bent growing up at school, doing your HSC?
I was a dropout. I dropped out of school halfway through year 11.
Are you trying to tell me you were a space cadet?
No, I like many of my joys and interests in life, they came late. I didn't know anything about what I wanted to do with my life through school, and even in my early adulthood, I just took whatever job was available. I didn't really care. Radio was always my first love. I'd been a radio fanatic since I could pick up a transistor radio and listen to it in bed. But I think my interest in astronomy's always sort of been in the back of my mind. I used to go to my grandparents' place over in Lorne in Maitland and just lie on the cement on a summer night and just lie back and look up at the stars and try and figure what was going on out there and count the satellites as they screamed past. So I think it's always been a fascination for me, and it was probably spawned by the Apollo missions. And, the chance to talk to Fred on a regular basis about these things was just a fantastic opportunity, and I'm glad he said yes. So, I think I've always been intrigued, and there's so much I want to learn, and so much so I bought myself a telescope. So I'm learning how to use that and where to point it and when not to point it. And it's some of the things that Fred has taught me I've been able to use in my science fiction novels. So there's a few elements to these books that I've written that I couldn't have even considered because I wouldn't have known they existed had I never spoken to Fred about astronomy. So, and one of the big twists in one of the books is based on something Fred told me. So, which I won't reveal now because
no spoilers, please.
There's two or three people who haven't read it. But but mathematically speaking, no, I'm a dud. I think that's what inspired me to leave school, was the last mathematics test I ever sat, because I'll never do it again.
Can I stay with you, Andrew? And I want
Sure.
to use the platform of science fiction, because that's another point of entry for me as more of a word person than a numbers person. I've read my share of science fiction. I enjoy the genre, and I've written about all the language that's come out of science fiction. There's a wonderful website that I can recommend to listeners of Space Nuts called the sfdictionary.com that's been put together. It's an historical dictionary of science fiction terms. It's been compiled by just getting the gentleman's name here, the editor at large of the Oxford English Dictionary, Jesse Shieldlower. I'd like to ask you, though, Andrew, I know that having written your sci-fi novels and having spoken at length and learnt so much through Fred, has there been a real standout writer or who's been more than prescient in terms of how space exploration or our space have evolved, to its modern level? What's the writer in particular who's shone for you in that regard?
I would have to say Stanley Robinson. He's written science fiction. He's consulted on TV shows about how certain things could be done in terms of our exploration of space. I loved his series on Mars. He wrote a trilogy on Mars: Red Mars, Green Mars, Blue Mars, which was more or less about humans settling on Mars and doing what Fred hopes will never happen, and terraforming it and turning it into a livable planet. And some of his theories were, a lot of people agree that his concepts and his capacity to develop the ideas are, to a certain degree, workable. I mean, we know realistically Mars is just too small to hold an atmosphere, and it will never be. You could never do what people envisage would be what they want to do to that planet. But he certainly come up with some fabulous ideas and written them into some great stories. He writes at a complexity level that I sometimes struggle with, but it certainly does. It certainly opens your mind and makes you wonder about what we are going to achieve as humans when we start getting out there amongst the stars, because it will happen. It will happen.
Fred, for you?
I did go back to to the great names of science fiction. I used to read a lot of science fiction. I gave up on it because I kept thinking, you can't do that. You can't. That's impossible. You can't possibly do that. But Arthur C. Clarke, particularly with things like the idea of geostationary satellites, that's an extraordinary vision for somebody who was actually then a radio engineer, but clearly destined for a great career in science fiction writing. But the idea of geostationary satellites, I've got his I think it was 1947. I've got his paper on it. It was in Wireless World, and when you read it, what he says is exactly what happened. He even calculated what would be the size of the dish that you'd need on the side of your house to pick up these signals, and it's exactly what they are. These little parabolic dishes that you see everywhere. That he calculated the size of them. That was in 1947. Astonishing.
Like a user's manual.
Yeah, almost like that. That's right. Yeah.
All right. This is my curveball one. If I said that I'm a Scorpio and therefore I'm given to sardonic humor, I can be treacherous at times. Are you thinking that I'm completely daft? The whole notion of astrology up against astronomy, is it complete bunkum in your scholarly mind, or do you think that there's a grain of truth in this whole idea of the galaxies, the alignment of constellations, and our own behavior as human beings?
Can I jump in with a really quick answer to that?
Yeah,
please
feel free to just throw bricks at me. But I just wanted to ask. It's the first opportunity I've had to ask you this, Fred. But what have you got, Andrew?
It's right up there with crystals and oils.
All right.
There's nothing wrong with crystals.
That might be the same for you, Fred.
Well, look, of course, 400 years ago, astronomy and astrology were the same thing. In fact, I did a bit of work on this recently. The two names go back, I can't remember, 12th or 13th centuries in the English language. And the really interesting thing about them is their origin, David, because astrology basically is astron and logos, so that means words about the stars. Astronomy is astron and nomos, which is numbering the stars, and that kind of tells you very nicely what the backgrounds are historically. I've had a lot to do with astrologers. I used to give an annual talk when I lived in the UK to the Scottish Astrological Society. And my colleagues thought it was bonkers. Colleagues in the observatory thought I'd lost my head. But I went, they liked hearing about what's happening in the real solar system rather than in their solar system. And yes, while the premise on which astrology is built is one that really doesn't hold water, and when you do all the statistical tests, astrological predictions come out the same as pure guesses. What I admired was the diligence that these people used to make their calculations. There was a huge amount. This is all done by hand in those days. Nowadays, it's all done by computers. But they calculated ephemerides and all sorts of really extraordinary things that was in its own way admirable. And I thought, well, if you take, you've got a basic premise that you take that's faulty, but then you run with it, there's something to be admired in that. Where I do get upset is when people make lots of money out of pulling the wool over people's eyes and making astrological predictions that really shouldn't. It's false advertising in a way. So that's the thing that really I'm not keen on.
All right. Well, this is my last question, and it's heroes, and I'd like to. You're allowed to choose two heroes of astronomy. One from the prior to 1900, so all bets are open there, from Galileo to Copernicus or wherever you may choose, and then someone the 20th century onwards. So you choose one from each period. I'm going to put the acid on you, Andrew, straight away. So you're not going to be copying Fred's notebook. Who would they be for you?
Oh gosh, it's not an easy question to answer. I watched that BBC series many years ago called The Planets, and I just found it so intriguing, and they dropped so many names in that. But the one that stuck in my mind was William Herschel. I for some reason found the work he did to be just stunning, and he pioneered so many things. I think, would I be right in saying it was the first large telescope was Herschel, and he identified thousands of objects in the night sky. So, a real pioneer, and he set a benchmark that just people grow and grow and grow to. and I think he I think he was a standout when it came to not only discovery but development of the tools we needed to make discoveries. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does,
yeah, absolutely.
In the 20th century, I'm going to sound like a real, a real suck up here, but it's Fred Watson.
You've made my
because that was Fred's answer as well.
I know that. Mainly because I've been associated with him for so long and I've learned so much. And like the Space Nuts audience who constantly say how easy he is to listen to and how he can explain such complex things in language, in a language that is so understandable and nut it all out for people so that they can walk away and go, I really understood that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a quality that Fred has that is not easy for a lot of people. And he does it so brilliantly, and he's always available. He's always willing to talk, and he's a radio presenter's dream, because you ask him a question, you can go and make a cup of coffee and feed the cat and come back and just catch the end of the answer. It's as you know, in radio, the last thing you want are people to go in answer to a question, yes. So for me, it's Fred, and I think the Space Nuts audience would have to agree with me, because he's just so very good to work with and so very easy to listen to. And I did say this last week in episode 300, but I'll say it again for you, David. People in all the time I've spoken to Fred on the radio and on the podcast that have cornered me have said, is Fred really as nice as he sounds? And the answer is wholeheartedly yes.
All right. So, Fred, you can't pick yourself and you can't pick Herschel, but who would they be? Who would those the two pin-ups for you?
Yeah, there's so many to choose from, David.
It's that's why I asked.
That's right. So let me just take two random ones. The ancient one, I choose the great Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe, who was sort of, he's basically not single-handedly, but masterminded probably what was the first scientific institution. They built an observatory on the island of Hven, which is in the Øresund between modern-day Denmark and Sweden. And he mustered what resources he had to make the finest observations of positions of objects in the night sky before the invention of the telescope. It was on the eve of the invention of the telescope. He lived in the second half of the 17th century. I like him too because we share the same birthday, only 398 years apart. He was born in 1546. Sorry, I said 17th century, I meant the 16th century. He was born in 1546. Of course, the calendar changed in the UK in 1752, so it's not exactly 398 years apart, but his birthday is the same as mine. And the other thing, he was a flawed character because he was probably a bit of a tyrant with the farmers and the people of the island who he grabbed them to do all his work for them, building watermills to make paper so he could publish his results, things of that. So extraordinary stuff. But he also, his other claim to fame is he was an astrologer as well as an astronomer. So that was what you did in the late 16th century. And he made a prediction as a result of a solar eclipse, which was the death of Suleiman the Magnificent of the Ottoman Empire. He predicted that this guy would die. It turned out that he died 6 weeks before, so it was, a bit after the event, and everybody ridiculed him, in particular one of his cousins, with whom he eventually had a duel, which Tycho lost because the cousin, Mandrup Parsberg was his name, was great with a sword and basically took off Tycho's nose. At a dinner party. It must have been lovely having all that going on in a dinner party. Your nose has just landed in my soup. Anyway, but what he did was then he basically invented prosthetic noses. He had them. He had two sorts. He had one's made of copper for weekdays and one's made of an alloy of gold and silver for weekends, for Sundays. So an extraordinary person. So
what a life.
And for a 20th century astronomer, somebody of whom you've never heard, if I can do that, because this is a person, I'm going to name him, Ben Gascoigne, a New Zealand-born Australian astronomer. He died in 2010. I think he was born in 1915. He was 95 when he passed away. Had a long and highly productive life in astronomy. It just happens that I'm writing his biography as a memoir for the Australian Academy of Science at the moment, and I'm overdue with it. So if anybody's listening, it's important that it is in progress. I am writing it. So I've got a couple of pictures. I'm going to hold. That's Ben immediately after the Second World War with a transit telescope. A young, bright astronomer, incredibly gifted young man. With I've read some of his papers; they're quite extraordinary. This is him near the end of his life, well into his 90s, but he was just a delight. That picture of that great smile on his face, that was Ben throughout. So optimistic, talented, gifted. He in 1980, and I'd only known him a couple of years then. He basically retired from astronomy, although he was honestly Australia's grand old man, father figure of astronomy. But he said he retired, and he did that because his wife was one of Canberra's best known artists, Rosalie Gascoigne, very, very famous artist. And Ben sort of stopped his career in order to be able to support her. She died in the 1990s, sadly. Wow. But really a remarkable story, and somebody who I hold in great esteem. And I'm, honoured to have known him personally. He seemed to quite like me, actually. So that was really nice.
That's strange, Fred.
Yeah, anyway.
Well, thank you for indulging me with those questions. Illustrious answers. I wouldn't expect anything less. It's a thrill to actually be part of this podcast. And it's also, I agree with you, the joy of having Fred on the airwaves is you throw what seems the most impossible or opaque question, asking him about does the sun have seasons? And you're thinking, what could he possibly say? Suddenly, what comes back is clarity, is enthusiasm. You listen and you learn, and you also really enjoy the engagement. So it's that, as they say, it's the double threat of the knowledge and the clarity to communicate. And I'm not sure, Fred, if that's due to your background as a musician or as a comedian, which is the one that is the most beneficial for a communicator.
Well, it's true. I used to do a lot of music, of course, and playing in public. But I did once do a gig as a stand-up comedian, and it was, it was doomed from the start, because this was when I lived in Scotland, and this was in a Scottish working men's club. They needed a comedian. They got no. The regular gig had dropped out or something. So they asked me, and I said, oh, yeah, I can do that. Now, an English person, put somebody with an English accent in a Scottish working men's club, you could feel the waves of hate coming up. It was the hardest gig I've ever done. And what made it worse, this was the absolute death knell for the whole thing, was that in the interval, they had a raffle, and I won it. He's won the raffle as well. Get rid of him. We can't have this guy. Oh, dear. Anyway, so I've never aspired to be a stand-up comic.
Well, comedy's lost is astronomy's gain. Put it that way, Fred.
Thank you.
Absolutely true. Yeah.
Thank you, David. Thanks ever so much for those kind words. And that's, I was going to say I'm really glad we invited you on, but we're glad because you bring a different, a different slant on everything. And your evening show, I think, is one of the highest rating evening shows, certainly in the listening area that you go to, which is all of Victoria. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. No, thank you. That's kind of you. It's we put a lot of love and a lot of work into the show. But you're only as good as your guests, as you full well know, Andrew.
Yeah, absolutely true. Yes, and I think I told a couple of horror stories last week about guests that went belly up.
Yeah, I heard that. I could relate.
Yes, yes, indeed. David, thank you so much for doing a little segment for us on Space
It's a
Nuts
big
episode
segment.
301. It's
Yeah.
it's been a lot of fun, and it's good to occasionally get people to come in and sort of quiz Fred and get a different perspective on things and learn things that I wouldn't have thought to ask him either. So thanks again. It's really been good having you here.
Pleasure. Thanks again for the invitation, and congratulations. 301 is an auspicious number. May there be many more to come.
Well, it's certainly more than 300. Anyway,
Right.
thanks,
Thank you,
David. Good to
David.
have you here. Thanks. And you
Covered
are
well. Thank you.
listening to Space Nuts with Andrew Dunkley and Professor Fred Watson.
Oh. Did
He
David
he's dropped out before I could tell him not to close his browser because.
Do you want me to text him?
Yeah, just say. Well, I'll have to probably send him a link now because with the browser closed, his upload won't have finished.
Has it closed? Can you see that he's closed?
Yeah, it's gone. It's gone.
Oh, okay. All
yeah.
Right. Oh well, you'll be able to do that because he just does the FM upload. Do you mind? Do you want me to? Well, I can't do it. It's too late. If you can send him
I'll have to see how it goes at the end, and then I'll be able to email him a link so he can reopen it, so that we can get the rest of the segment, because he was dragging a bit. He was only at 60% upload.
Oh, okay, I see.
So,
all right.
Yeah, I meant to tell him before, but I thought I'd catch him before he dropped out, but he just dropped out. So, never mind.
So, is there any point in me, sending?
Well, if you just want to send him a text and say, see, it won't give me the option until I've finished.
What I'll do, let me do this. I'll just send him a text and let him know what's happening.
Okay.
I'm just thanking him. So Andrew, well.
Blimey, 10 text messages.
Oh, yeah. What's not your segment? Is it what's I'll let so what I've just said is Andrew will send you a link after the show to upload your segment since it's only half uploaded.
Yeah, that'll do.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the easiest way. Yeah. And I'll just explain the technicalities.
Yeah, if you can do that. It's an easy thing to do, and it usually works really well, actually.
Yeah, it does. We can whip through the rest because that was a pretty long segment.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. I'll send that. Okay.
All right.
Ready to go. Neptune.
Neptune, indeed. Okay. I'll just get a link here, and here we go. 3, 2, 1.
3, 2, 1.
Space Nuts.
Now, a reminder, if you want to leave us a review, you can do that on your podcast distributor, whoever you use, and there are many, from Stitcher to Google Podcast to iTunes to, I couldn't name them all. But if you would be so kind as to leave us a review, it helps to spread the word and brings in more listeners to the podcast. The more the merrier. That's what I always say. So, yes, your reviews are most welcome. And we've had a couple recently, and thank you so much to those people who've been so very kind in giving us 5 stars. That is fantastic. Really, really nice of you. Now, Fred, let's talk about Neptune. It's a planet that sort of gets forgotten a lot of the time, but it's one of the prettiest ones. I do love those shades of blue.
Yeah.
But there's something else about the planet. In fact, the color could be misleading because we're going to talk about temperature. And what they've noticed through the collation, if you like, of many years of studying the planet is that something weird is happening out there.
That's right. And yes, you're absolutely right. This is astronomers based actually mostly in Europe. I think it's led by scientists from the University of Leicester in the UK. And these scientists have basically used many telescopes to put together a picture of the way Neptune's temperature has changed over the last 20 years or so. Actually, it's 17 years to be exact that they've been tracking the temperature. How do you measure the temperature of a planet? Well, you use infrared measurements. Infrared radiation is effectively heat radiation. So the infrared signature of an object tells you about the amount of heat that it's giving, which is telling you about its temperature.
You know how they tell the temperature of Uranus?
I don't want to go there.
giant special thermometer.
Yes, all right. Yeah, I had a feeling that was what was coming. Anyway, get back to Neptune, the most distant planet in the solar system. Yeah, it is possible to measure its temperature without a giant metal thermometer. And the way you do it is with infrared radiation. Now, what these scientists have done in I think, a very clever way, and you kind of used the right word, they've collated data from many different large telescopes which have observed Neptune over the last 17 years. And they include the very large telescopes of the European Southern Observatory. I think that's been the primary, the primary source of data. But they've also, I think, used the Keck telescopes and maybe the Subaru telescope these are all telescopes, big telescopes in Hawaii. Because the planet, of course, is observable from either hemisphere, the northern or southern hemisphere.
Yeah.
I was just looking for the list of what telescopes they've used, but I can't pick it up. Never mind. They've used these several large instruments. These are all telescopes in the 8-meter class, so they're not small things that you look through. They are 8-meter class telescopes equipped with state-of-the-art thermal measurement equipment, in other words, infrared sensors.
Gosh, they have used some. The Gemini,
yeah,
the VLT.
Yeah.
You said the Keck.
I did.
And the Subaru. Yeah,
Yep.
It's a whole bunch.
Yeah.
The Spitzer.
Okay, Spitzer is an infrared orbiting telescope. So yes, it's great that they've curated in a way all these different observations of Neptune, and yeah, the bottom line is it's an unexpected result because the Neptune seems to be cooling or have a drop in the global temperature, but there seems to be an extraordinary warming at the south pole of Neptune. Now, a warming in the southern hemisphere of Neptune is what they expected because Neptune has, by the way, a year of 165 of our years. So each season lasts around 40 years rather than the 3 months that our seasons last. It's the same reason that there's an inclination of the planet's axis to the plane of its orbit. But the southern summer, which is now approaching. I mean, I guess these observations have been made during the Neptunian southern springtime, where you expect it to be getting warmer, but actually it's got colder by significant amounts. Between 2003 and 2018, the period of these observations, the total global temperature of Neptune dropped by 8 degrees Celsius. Now, that's a huge amount.
It sure is.
But the South Pole has, in fact, there's more recent observations between 2018 and 2020 that the South Pole has risen in temperature by 11 degrees Celsius. There is what's called a polar vortex at Neptune's South Pole, and that apparently is quite warm. And that's been something that's been observed for a long time, but nobody's ever seen this strikingly rapid warming that has occurred between 2018 and 2020 of 11 degrees Celsius. That's an enormous amount.
Yeah.
And so this is puzzling the authors. And I mentioned most of them were in Europe. There is certainly another contributor, Glenn Orton, who's a research scientist at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Caltech. So what they're trying to do now is theorize why this should have happened. But at the moment, I don't think there's an answer to it. I think they are still trying to analyze the features of Neptune's atmosphere that might explain these totally unexpected results.
And it appears that they will be doing some analysis on Neptune using the James Webb Space Telescope, so it could reveal some secrets.
Yeah.
I wonder, though, Fred, given how long a Neptunian year is and how long the seasons are, that perhaps we just haven't got enough data to figure it out yet. It's a short window for a very long year.
I think that's absolutely right, Andrew. I'm sure that's, you could, if you observed the Earth for a week, which is kind of the same sort of fraction of the year that you observe, it's much more actually than the fraction of the Neptune year that we've looked at. But you'd see fluctuations. But these are big changes in temperature. It's right. Maybe these changes do go on all the time, but when we average them out over long periods, they just look like a gradual change. Whatever it is, it's certainly intrigued the astronomical community, particularly the planetary scientists.
Yes. Well, hopefully they will be able to piece it all together, and it might just be something that Neptune does normally. But the question is why? Why does it do it? Yeah. But if you want to look into that paper from the University of Leicester, it's in the Planetary Science Journal. This is Space Nuts. You're with Andrew Dunkley and Professor Fred Watson. Beauty.
So the questions that we're going to have. Sorry, Andrew.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I thought it was Roberto that he said.
It could have been too. I couldn't understand him. I'll say Roberto.
I think it might have been Roberto. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Here we go. We'll just keep on keeping on. In 3, 2, 1.
Space Nuts.
Now, if you would like to become a patron and chuck us a few bucks, maybe, a quarter, you can do that via our website. All the information there about becoming a patron at spacenutspodcast.com or spacenuts.io. And just hit the support Space Nuts button and get all the information you need about becoming a patron, whether you want to do that as a monthly contribution or as a one-off, or you just want to buy us a cup of coffee. All those, and that's literally true. All those options are there for people who want to become patrons, and a special shout out to our patrons who've signed up and stuck with us for a long, long time, or people who might have signed up in the last week or two. We really appreciate your support. So thank you. Okay, Fred, we've got some questions, and the first one comes from, I think it's Roberto.
Hi, Space Nuts. This is Roberto from Reggio Emilia, Italy. You are making an outstanding job. Great. I have a question. I am a 46-year-old guy, and I'm wondering, I'm expected to live 40 years more, and I would like to know if I will ever see a spacecraft heading to another star in my life, and if I will ever see the results of this visit to another star. Is there any project about it? Thank you.
Lovely to hear from you. We haven't had many questions from Italy, so fantastic. I'll be in Italy next year. No, later this year. Later this year. Yeah, we've booked a trip to Italy. So that'll be nice. Will we see within his 40 years remaining I was trying to be diplomatic. A mission to another star, and will we get data from it? I know they were talking about sending mini spaceships to Alpha Centauri, but whether or not that sends back data remains to be seen. But that's still in the sort of let's talk about it phase, I think, isn't it?
It is. You're quite right, Andrew. I'd just perhaps offer Roberto a few more years, though, because I think as time goes on, we're all living longer. Every decade, the average age goes up by something like, or the average lifespan goes up by something like 3 years. It's quite extraordinary, the rate. That might slow down. I think a lot of that was because people gave up smoking, which is, perhaps one of the biggest factors. But I reckon, Roberto, you might be able to look forward to another 60 years, never mind 40 years.
There you are.
And that, of course, broadens the window and makes it more likely that we will do that. And what Andrew's just mentioned is quite right. There is a project which is still ongoing, funded privately by the Breakthrough Foundation. It's called Breakthrough Starshot. And it was designed to look at the feasibility of of accelerating mini spacecraft, and these are tiny things. They're the size of a packet of cards or smaller. A mini spacecraft using light sails. The idea is that you equip one of these tiny spacecraft with an enormous mylar sheet, a light sail, and then you build 999 more, because they were talking about flotillas of about 1,000 of them. And then you blast them with light from a very powerful laser, which gradually accelerates the spacecraft. And even though the acceleration is excruciatingly slow, because you can do this over a long period of time, you actually can push them relatively quickly, up to a speed that is a significant fraction of the speed of light. And they're talking about something like 20 to 30% of the speed of light. Now, if you head for Proxima Centauri, which is a member of the Alpha Centauri system, it's the nearest star to us other than the Sun. It's a red dwarf, which we know has its own family of planets. So that's 4.3 light years away. So at, say a third of the speed of light, it's going to take you in the region of 13, 14 years, something like that, to get there. Neglecting the acceleration time. And then, exactly as Roberto hints, there is the return time, because if you then take your photographs as you're whizzing past Proxima Centauri and its planets, they take 4.3 years to come back at the speed of light. So you're talking about something in the region of 20 years for the full mission, which is well within Roberto's time span. Even if we don't do this for another 20 years or so, I think it is still something that Roberto will live to see. And that's an extraordinary thought.
It is, yeah. Very exciting. I hope they do it. I really...
I think there's a good chance.
I think the problem is, though, we don't have any capacity to stop them when they get there, do we?
No.
They're just going to fling past.
It's a flyby, yeah.
Yeah. Or a fly into, maybe.
Yeah, it could be, yeah. That's right.
All right, Roberto, thanks for your question. Lovely to hear from you. Let's get closer to home for us, Fred, with Sandy from Melbourne.
Hi, Professor Watson and Andrew. It's Sandy here from Melbourne again. My question today is about meteor CNEOS 2014-0108, which was recently confirmed by US Space Force to be our first detected interstellar visitor, and incidentally predating the cow patterns, Andrew calls it. As I understand, this meteor entered Earth's atmosphere over the ocean, and the authors of the 2019 study into the object talks about, although unlikely, the possibility of recovering a fragment of the meteor. Do you think it would be possible to recover such an object? Once again, congratulations on the 300 episodes. Such a great show. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandy. Lovely to hear from you. Well, I suppose if they knew exactly where it came down and where it settled and it was accessible, yes, they might be able to find a bit. But yeah, a needle in a haystack is probably an understatement.
Yeah, look, it's hard enough to find meteor fragments when they land in a desert that's got not nothing else to confuse it. But on the ocean floor is a different kettle of fish altogether. It's apparently it's in the Pacific Ocean. It's off the coast of Manus Island. Is the place where this thing landed, and this object. I think it's been classified because it was the way it was detected by probably defense type sensors, but it's recently been reported as being probably the first observed interstellar object because of its velocity, around 60 kilometers per second, and it suggests that this would be something that has come from another stellar system, maybe from a collision or something like that, or even an explosion of a star or whatever. But this thing has come out from interstellar space, like Oumuamua and the interstellar comet Borisov. But this thing burned up in the atmosphere, and we don't actually know whether any remnants of it did reach the surface of the Earth. But the one of the astronomers who actually reported the finding has said that they are currently investigating whether a mission to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean in the hope of finding fragments of this 2014 meteor could be fruitful or even possible. My guess is that is a very long shot indeed.
Indeed, I agree.
But hope remains eternal. You never know, and that's the thing about these interstellar objects. We've just got to be ready for them to find out more about them.
Yeah. So probably a long shot, Sandy, but never say never is probably the right attitude. We said that about space nuts. Never say never. It might happen.
It'll never work.
It'll never work. No. Thanks, Sandy. Good to hear from you. Maybe if you got your togs and a snorkel, you could go and help them out. The water will be a bit warmer than where you are, I can guarantee that.
Yeah.
All right. And thanks to everyone who sent in questions. We've got a few new ones, so we'll pick away at those over the next few episodes. Fred, we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you so much, as always.
Great pleasure, Andrew. Always good. And what a special episode with David Astle there, sending us his curveball questions. That was great stuff.
Yes, nice to sort of launch into our next 100 episodes with someone else asking the questions. But next week, I think we'll be back to normal. So look forward to your company then.
Sounds great. See you soon.
Okay, thanks, Fred. Fred Watson, astronomer at large. And from me, Andrew Dunkley, thanks for your company. Don't forget to send your questions via our website, spacenutspodcast.com or spacenuts.io in text or audio form. Until then, take care, stay safe, and we'll catch you real soon on another episode of Space Nuts. Bye-bye.
Space Nuts.
You've been listening to the Space Nuts podcast.
Available at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or your favorite podcast player. You can also stream on demand at Bytes.com.
This has been another quality podcast production from Bytes.com.